Alright, welcome back to Formula One news, and honestly, the closer we get to the season, the more intense things are getting behind the scenes. With all the ongoing Mercedes engine controversy, Mattia Binotto, now at Audi, has come out with a pretty bold take. His view is that regardless of what happens with this compression ratio drama, Mercedes and possibly other top teams are very likely to sandbag heavily at the start of the season. His argument is basically this. Even if Mercedes do have some kind of engine advantage right now, they won't necessarily show their full hand straight away. Instead, they'll probably hide some performance to stop their rivals from getting extra development opportunities under the ADUO system later in the year. And based on everything we've seen so far, Binotto still believes that Mercedes are in a very strong position heading into 2026, something that Toto Wolff's recent comments only reinforce. As always, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you're enjoying the content and subscribe if you're new. Now, stepping back for a second, we are officially about 1 month away from the Australian Grand Prix on March the 8th. That means that we're in the final stretch of pre-season where every little detail, every rumour, and every last test session suddenly feels way more significant. We've already had the Barcelona shakedown. We've seen Williams finally get their car on track, and tomorrow is the Super Bowl, which is actually relevant to F1 this year, because Cadillac are planning to reveal their 2026 car during a Super Bowl halftime ad. That is absolutely massive exposure. You don't get more mainstream than that. They've already been teasing the car in Times Square, so Cadillac are going all in on marketing. But at the end of the day, hype doesn't win races. What matters is whether the car is actually competitive. Sergio Perez has already said that he's not just here to drive around at the back of the grid, so clearly they're aiming to be respectable from day one. Whether that's realistic or not, we'll find out soon enough. The day after the Super Bowl, we get the McLaren and Aston Martin launches. That means we'll finally see McLaren's real 2026 livery, because what we saw in Barcelona was basically a blacked out test version. Aston will also reveal their car properly, and honestly, most liveries so far have looked pretty good this year, so hopefully we get something interesting. Then we head into official testing in Bahrain, but there's already some frustration here. Only the final hour of each day will be broadcast live. It's a strange situation because Barcelona wasn't televised as it was technically a team-organised shakedown. Fine, but Bahrain is meant to be the official pre-season test, and yet we're still getting limited coverage. Sky will show just the last hour of each day, and then there'll be a testing wrap-up and Ted Kravitz's notebook later on. That's better than nothing, I guess, but it still feels unnecessarily restrictive. At least in the second week of testing, from February the 18th to the 20th, we'll get a full day coverage if we want to watch it. But by that point, though, a lot of the real running and experimentation would have already happened. Now let's shift to Haas, because there is an interesting storyline developing there. Jack Doohan officially joined Haas as their reserve driver on February the 3rd. His time at Alpine didn't go particularly well, but now he's back in the F1 environment, which is good for him. Haas's future is particularly interesting because of what's going on at Ferrari. There are strong rumours that Charles Leclerc has privately told Ferrari if this year's car isn't competitive, he's seriously considering leaving. And you can bet Lewis Hamilton would likely feel the same if Ferrari were to completely mess up the new regulations. That means Ferrari could end up needing at least one new driver in the next couple of years, and Oliver Behrman is looking more and more promising as a prime candidate. Behrman had a really impressive rookie season at Haas last year. Yes, he made mistakes, there were red flag incidents, crashes, and moments of inexperience, but his standout performances in Brazil and Mexico were genuinely special. By the end of the season, many drivers and team principals rated him as the best rookie, even above Isaac Hadjar. His qualifying pace was particularly strong and his racecraft clearly improved as the year went on. Now that doesn't mean Esteban Ocon was terrible. Ocon scored 38 points to Behrman's 41, so on paper they were pretty close. Over the season they were basically tied in qualifying head-to-head 12-12. Ocon just didn't have the same headline-grabbing performances as Behrman. But what's really interesting is that Haas boss Io Komatsu recently said he openly admitted that Haas expected more from Ocon last year. He did say that part of the blame lies with the team, strategy errors, bad weekends, etc., but still, it was quite a blunt public statement. Given that Haas have just signed Doohan as reserve and are openly critiquing Ocon, this feels like a situation to keep an eye on. There will definitely be a driver market movement in 2027 and beyond, and Haas could be right in the middle of it. Now on to Aston Martin. They're planning a 200-kilometer filming day in Bahrain on February the 10th, right before testing begins on the 11th. Adrian Newey has hinted they might bring a slightly more advanced version of the car compared to what we saw in Barcelona. Aston were also rumoured to have good correlation between their simulator, wind tunnel and real-world data, which is a huge positive, especially because there had been some doubts about the accuracy of their simulation tools in the past. McLaren, according to Andrea Stella, also had strong correlation back in Barcelona. That means that what they saw on track matched what they expected back at the factory. However, it sounds like McLaren's Melbourne spec car won't be dramatically different from what we've already seen. Other teams like Ferrari, Mercedes and possibly Red Bull might bring bigger upgrades before the first race. Now back to the Mercedes engine drama, because this is still the biggest story of the pre-season. According to Motorsport Italia, Honda were the first team to formally alert the FIA about Mercedes' alleged compression ratio trick. Audi quickly followed, and both manufacturers are reportedly frustrated enough that they might consider legal action if Mercedes are allowed to continue. The core issue still remains the same. The rules cap compression ratio at 16:1. The current testing method checks this in cold static conditions. Mercedes may have engineered something that behaves legally under that test, but operates differently when the engine is hot and running. Now, there's serious talk that the FIA could change how this is measured, potentially checking compression ratio while the engine is hot, but that raises a whole new set of questions. What counts as hot? 80 degrees, 100 degrees, 1000 degrees? And how do you standardize that across different engines? Even if 4 out of 5 manufacturers support a change, Formula One management Liberty Media still has to approve it. And Liberty will not want a scenario where Mercedes suddenly can't race in Melbourne because their engine has been declared illegal. This would also affect McLaren, Williams and Alpine, Mercedes' customer teams, which would be a complete disaster for the sport. So instead of an immediate ban, the more realistic outcome might be a delayed change later in the season, or extra development allowances for rival manufacturers, or a clarification for 2027 rather than 2026, but this was already mentioned in my last video. Meanwhile, Toto Wolff remains extremely confident. In fact, George Russell is now widely considered a serious championship favourite after Barcelona, and Toto has been very positive about all of the new regulations, praising the aesthetics of the car, the overtaking potential, and the strategic complexity of energy deployment, even though many fans and drivers are skeptical about lift and coast in qualifying. Interestingly, Mercedes originally proposed adding an extra MGU-K to harvest energy from the front axle, which might have reduced the need for lift and coast, but that idea was rejected. Finally, let's talk about ADUO, additional development and upgrade opportunities, because this ties directly into Binotto's sandbagging claim. Under the new rules, every 6 races engine performance is assessed. If a manufacturer is more than 2% behind the best engine, they get extra development time. If they're more than 4% behind, they get even more allowances. This creates a strange incentive. If Mercedes really do have, say, 20 extra horsepower, they might choose to use only 10 of it early in the season, keeping rivals within 2% so they don't get extra developmental time. That's exactly what Mercedes did in 2014 to 2015. They deliberately didn't run their engine at full potential because they didn't want to trigger rule changes or give rivals an excuse to complain. Even if Mercedes' compression ratio trick only gives them a modest advantage, smart power management and sandbagging could still keep them ahead. Damon Hill and Johnny Herbert recently debated the expected qualifying gap in Melbourne. Herbert predicted around 1.3 seconds across Q1, while Hill suggested closer to 1.8 seconds. Personally, I think Hill might be closer. This new era could produce a bigger field spread than we've seen in recent years. So yeah, a lot to unpack. Mercedes look confident, Audi and Honda are pushing back hard, Red Bull are quietly watching how this plays out. Ferrari seem comfortable with their data, and teams like McLaren and Aston are focused on correlation and development rather than politics. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time.